This has become a favorite recipe of mine for an appetizer. Cheese, I call them Sablès, even though it kind of looks like Sablès in French. And we're going to start out by weighing out the flour on a scale. Set your bowl up there and then zero out the scale and you can measure in your flour. And of course, that's the most accurate way to measure flour, much more accurate than using a measuring cup. Now we're going to add the salt. And of course, this is table salt. I always want to use table salt unless the recipe specifies kosher or otherwise. We'll add our baking powder. A little bit of cayenne pepper. And we're going to add these ingredients into our food processor, since that's what we're using to mix everything. And of course, you can use a spoon to help make sure that the ingredients don't spill outside of the food processor. Now we're going to blend just long enough to mix those dry ingredients, which doesn't take much. Now we're going to chop up our butter. Now we're going to cube the butter, and this is the method I always use for this kind of a recipe or for butter for a pie crust. To cut lengthwise in half, then turn it over, lengthwise cut again. You can see that gives you 4 square ends there. And then you can go down the length of the cube to cut it that way. And that gives you a nice size of pieces of butter. If you just put the whole sticks into the processor, it would take too long to chop up the butter, and it would do funny things to the texture of the mix. So that's why we want to cube our butter beforehand, so it mixes more evenly and more quickly. And a little sharp paring knife is perfect for that. Now we can put the lid on the food processor and blend. You can see we're just pulsing the blender there. We don't want to get crazy and overmix since we have flour in there. Now we're going to grate the cheese that we're going to use for the cheese flavoring of these crackers. And the cheese will grate more quickly if we use an edge. You can see here I'm using the corner, and then once I have that flattened out, I turn my block of cheese over so I have another edge. Notice how I keep turning it. And then shaking the cheese down there. This is my handy OXO grater. I dumped that little bit of cheese in the food processor. Put our cheese away. And now we're going to grate some cheddar cheese. This is extra sharp cheddar. Love the flavor of this Cracker Barrel cheese. And this is a softer cheese, so it doesn't take long. But as you can see, even with this, I keep turning it. You want to watch your knuckles there. You can just kind of press it down into the holes, and that's all good enough. Now we'll go ahead and put the cheddar in. Get our scraps of cheese. Add that in also, off of a clean countertop, of course. And now we'll blend the cheese into our mixture. We had the flour mixture, we put in the butter, and now we're going to blend the cheese. Again, notice how we're just pulsing. We don't want to turn it into goo. Just pulse until just broken up and blended. Now we're going to prepare the egg that we will be adding. It's just one egg for this, and we can break it up quickly with a fork. Obviously, I've sped up the video. You're welcome. And now we can add the egg to the food processor. And again, now we have egg, we have flour, we have cheese, so we don't want to over blend. Adequately blend, but not over blend. And again, we're pulsing the blender. We'll have just enough egg in there to hold the dough and the crackers together. And now we're ready to dump the dough out and start working with it. As you can see, it's very crumbly. It's a pretty dry dough. So we're going to have to work with it some to warm it with our hands to get everything to stick together. The warmth of our hands as we work this will warm and melt the butter more, help work the egg in, help to also warm and blend in the cheese, especially the cheddar cheese, and that's what's going to make this dough finally, really come together. But, again, better to do this by hand with the warmth of our hands than over mixing in the blender. You can see, though, you kind of just have to keep pushing and turning And just keep working with it, and it will come together. It's very crumbly to start, but it will come together the more you work it. You see, I have to keep scraping the pieces off of my hands. I need those wet gooey pieces in that block of dough to help it all come together. The recipe does not tell you to flour your hands beforehand, and we don't want the dough to be even more dry and crumbly than it already is. You can see there was just a few minutes work. Now it's finally really coming together. Now we're going to take some saran wrap, and we're going to wrap up this piece of dough. You can see the kind of marbled texture where, you can see the pieces of dough. Pardon me, the pieces of butter that are in the dough. We'll go ahead and wrap that up tight. And now we can either refrigerate the dough or we can freeze it to use it another time. So this is a great recipe where you can do a lot of the work ahead and then bake it fresh before a holiday. Okay, now before we roll out the dough, we're going to bring it to room temperature. And now we will go ahead and flour our surface. You can see from the shadow I'm unwrapping the dough. This block of dough is going to be pretty hard once you start. When you start working with it, you'll need to just keep after it to soften it up with your hands. You can see it's wanting to be crumbly again, but you also have that marbling that shows just how much butter is in there, so it's usually going to be easier to break off one piece. Just use that one piece and roll it out. You can set the rest of it aside. And you can see this keeps wanting to break as I'm working with it, but you just keep pushing it back together, keep warming it with your hands. It will come together and roll out. Just have to have a little faith in the recipe and in warm hands. As you can see, our dough is finally really coming together, and now we're ready to take a rolling pin to it. As you can see, I just keep pushing those edges back together. And now I'm going to use this little cup with a sharp edge. an octagon or hexagon shape would also make for nice looking crackers for decoration. You can see these aren't super thin. They're a little tricky to peel up off the countertop. A little tiny metal spatula, or here I'm going to use a paring knife. I'll get them loose from the countertop so you can pick them up more easily. And as you can see with the size of the cracker and with the texture of the dough, those hold together and are pretty easy to transfer and work with. And now we'll roll out the dough again. And we'll cut out a few more crackers. We'll spread the flour back over our surface, and then we'll add in some more dough to the scraps. And that's a little bit of a starting over point. Again, you're going to need to use your hands to warm the dough and just keep working with it to get it to come together and roll out. And now this piece of dough is already warmed and ready to roll out. Again, you can see the marbling with the butter. And now we're going to prepare the egg wash for the crackers we have on the sheet. We'll use our handy little basting brush, and we're just going to go over the tops of the crackers. I'll help protect the dough and help them to brown nicely. This little OXO basting brush does a really nice job. In fact, you can use the brush to whisk the egg. And then here we have our kosher salt, so we're going to sprinkle each cracker with that, which just makes for such a good flavor. Nice little salty, cheesy crackers. And here we have another second sheet of crackers ready to go in the oven. So we're going to repeat the process. And now our crackers are ready to go in the oven and bake. We're going to bake them until lightly browned, like you can see here. They're so good. Enjoy.